So for whoever just joined, I'm Federica, I'm part of the Cpt team, and it's my pleasure to welcoming you all to this live presentation of Colorado Mesa University. I'm now leaving the floor to Alec, but before, I just wanted to remind you all that we will be available to answer all of your questions. So use the Q&A to write your question during the presentation, and we will be answering at the end of it. Thank you so much. Alex, the floor is yours.
Awesome, thank you. All right, I'll get my screen shared. 1 second. All right, there we go. So hello, everyone. My name is Alec Knight, and as Federica said, I'm the coordinator of international student admissions and programs for Colorado Mesa University. There, one of my job duties is serving as a designated school official, which means I help oversee our F1 visa program. And I've been working in international education for about the last 6 years, and nearly 4 of those have been here at CMU. So theoretically, I know what I'm talking about. We will see on that. So before we get started, there's a couple terms that I'm just going to define because I'll reference them several times throughout the presentation. The first thing we want to talk about is what is an F1 visa. So an F1 visa is a non-immigrant visa that is designed for the purpose of entering the United States to start and complete an educational program. So something that ends in an academic degree. The requirements to be eligible for an F1 visa: you have to be a resident of a foreign country with the intent to return home. You have to be admitted by an approved school. So CMU is a school that has been vetted by the Department of Homeland Security to host F1 international students. You have to prove sufficient funding to afford your education, and you also have to establish ties to your home country, which comes back to that intent to return home piece. This degree is specifically for the purpose of studying, so a lot of different things that fall outside of the purpose of studying aren't allowed on the visa. The working off campus is a good example of this, except for a few specific ways that we'll talk about today. And then I'll show you what this looks like on the next slide. But if you are on an F1 visa, you have 2 forms that matter. One of them is called an I-20, which is the immigration document for an F1 visa. And then you have the actual F1 visa in your passport, which I'll show you on the next slide. So after a student completes their program, they have what's called their grace period, which is a 60-day period in which to kind of decide what you're doing next, whether that's applying to a different program or at a different level of education, whether that's applying for some of these F1 benefits, or also just to make arrangements because you're deciding to go home and you need to, lease your apartment, sell a car, make arrangements, or travel and visit friends before you leave the US. So just so you have a visual, so this is an example of an I-20. Again, I'll talk about this several times throughout the presentation. Your I-20 is basically a sheet with all the information about your program where it lists your major, what you're studying, the proof of funding that you showed when you were getting admitted. It also lists some very important things like the end date on your program. Several of the benefits that I will talk about in the course of this presentation will reference the things that need to happen within a certain number of days from the end date on your I-20 or when you're allowed to start applying for those benefits. So again, an I-20 shows that right about there. So this is different from the actual visa, which is a piece of paper or a foil that goes in your passport, which will list, again, your CVIS ID number, which is also found up here on your I-20, and it will list the specific visa classification and then the date that it was issued and the date that it expires. But so when I talk about a visa, this is what I'm talking about. When I talk about an I-20, this is what I'm talking about. So now on to today's important topic, which is work permissions on an F1 visa. The first thing we're going to talk about quickly is on-campus employment. So this is just a general benefit that F1 students have when they're enrolled full-time. We're not going to focus too much on this because the 2 ways that you're allowed to work off campus are much more interesting and require an application process. So we're going to focus on those a little bit more. So the 2 kinds of off-campus employment are what are called curricular practical training, or CPT, and optional practical training, or OPT. So before we dive into those specific topics, there are a few more things that we want to define that apply to all work on an F1 visa, regardless of whether it's on campus or off campus. And the first thing is a social security number. And the second thing are taxes, everyone's favorite subject. Don't worry, we're not going to go too deep into any of those. This is not about to become a lecture on US tax law, but we're going to touch on that because there are a few things that you should be aware of. So the first thing is a social security number. This is a unique identifier number that an individual uses to accept employment, and also it allows you to establish credit, so applying for credit cards, doing credit checks if you're applying for an apartment, that kind of thing. So US citizens are assigned one of these at birth. So you get a social security card with your birth certificate, basically. But F1 students, this process looks a little different because you can only apply for a social security number for the purpose of employment. So you actually have to have a job lined up before you're allowed to apply for one of these, or you have to be in the OPT application phase to apply for one of these. But then once you successfully get a social security number, you're issued a card that looks like this with your name on it and your unique social security number. And this is required to start working. So taxes, again, everyone's favorite subject. What this boils down to is this is a really complicated subject, even for US citizens. For this reason, the international office at CMU always recommends that international students who work have their taxes done by a professional who specializes in or is aware of the tax laws surrounding international students, because it's really easy to do them wrong. So it's sometimes easier just to have a professional do it for you when you know that it will be done correctly. There is one bit of good news. So international students, especially in a bachelor's program, fall under this category. So you're not liable for income tax for the first 5 years that you spend in the US on a non-immigrant visa. So you still have to file a return, but any money you pay in income taxes throughout the year will come back to you in the form of a tax return. There is a fun, complicated test to determine exactly how long you've been in the US called the Substantive Presence Test, which I won't bore you with today, but yeah. So generally speaking, if you're in a bachelor's program, you don't need to worry about the money you're paying in taxes because you're just going to get a back check at the end of the year. So now we are going to shift gears a little bit and talk about work on campus. So in general, if you are enrolled full-time, you are allowed to work on campus. There are a specific set of restrictions that are placed on your work eligibility. First of all, that while classes are in session, you can work no more than 20 hours per week. So this is determined as part-time by US labor laws. If it's a break period, however, so if that's your spring break over, the winter break or over the summer, you're allowed to work up to 40 hours per week, which is again defined as full-time. You can't go over 40 hours per week, but again, you're allowed to work up to that threshold. And then a student has to have the receipt for their social security number application in order to start working. They don't need to have the physical card yet, but they need to have the receipt that shows that they applied and that the card is coming in the mail 2 weeks later. So what actually counts on campus is a broader category than you might think. So the general rule of thumb on this is that work on campus must directly serve the campus community. So really good examples of this are working in a campus bookstore or in the library or for dining services or in, say, a chemistry lab on campus, because those are all providing direct services to the student population. So sometimes things are physically located on campus, but it's not a direct service. So say there's a third-party construction company that's building a new building on campus, you couldn't count that as on-campus employment because that's a third party contracted by the university, but they're not actually providing any services. So to make things extra confusing, there is the possibility that you could be working physically off campus, but it still counts as on-campus employment because sometimes a larger research university might have a special research laboratory that's located off campus. but it's still doing research under the umbrella of the university. Or an example here at CMU, we actually have an art display downtown, and students in our fine arts program can work, running the door and taking tickets for that, art exhibit downtown. And then the last requirement is on-campus employment must not displace a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident. But really, that's again that's not something that you need to determine. That's on the DSO to determine. So now we've covered working on campus. Now let's talk about the ways that you are allowed to work off campus, which again is a little bit more of a complicated issue. So the first thing we're going to talk about is curricular practical training, hereafter referred to as CPT. So CPT is the legal avenue through which an F1 student is allowed to pursue an internship, whether that is paid or unpaid, but it's an internship taking place off campus. So this practical training has to relate directly back to your program of study, which means that it can't be something unrelated to what the degree program on your I-20. We'll talk about some examples of what CPT might look like, but basically it has to be related to your major. And ideally it should also be, integral to the degree program that you're pursuing. So a lot of programs, especially business programs, require you to do an internship in order to graduate, and CPT is the legal way that you'll go about that. So as I mentioned, this counts for both paid and unpaid internships. So even if you're not getting paid, you still have to go through CPT and follow all the rules for CPT to maintain your status while you're doing this. So the designated school official at whichever school you're at is the one who authorizes CPT in CVIS, which is the system that we use to maintain all of your immigration records. And we'll print out a new I-20 with the CPT authorization on it. So if you were to pursue CPT and you were a CMU student, you'd be talking to me or my director to work through this process. So one thing that is specifically important about CPT, it always occurs before the end date on your I-20, meaning that you would apply for CPT and try to pursue that opportunity while you're still in your degree program, not after you've finished. Authorization has to come for one specific employer, and it has to be for a specific period of time. So that means when you're approved for CPT, this is for a specific job that you've already been offered, and it has to have a start date and an end date. The reason for the start date and the end date is there are certain benefits that are tied to how long you do them. So that is part of the reason why you have to have, the offer has to be for a specific term. And you have to have CPT authorization before you can begin work. And then you actually can have more than one CPT authorization at the same time. So you could actually have multiple internships going with different companies as long as each of those jobs is directly related back to your program. So as I mentioned before, 20 hours per week is considered part-time. 40 hours per week is considered full-time. You can actually pursue CPT for either of those. Their CPT at full-time is usually something you would pursue in the summer when you're not taking classes, because again, the purpose of an F1 visa is to study, it's not work. So the opportunity to get this real world work experience is often something, again, that students will do over the summer when they're not required to take classes. So 1 year of full-time CPT. So again, if you spend 12 months working 40 hours per week, this eliminates your ability to pursue OPT, which is the next thing we will talk about. So really, if you want to boil this all down to one easy to remember thing, CPT is the ability to do an internship legally while on an F1 visa. And as an added benefit, you can get paid to do that. So as I mentioned, CPT must be curricular. And this means it directly relates to the student's field of study, and it involves a clear academic benefit or an experience that you wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to pursue. good examples of this. So if you're an accounting student and you get an internship working with a local certified public accountant to help people with balancing their books, that's a really good example of CPT that, again, we've had many students do this over the summer or even in the middle of a normal semester just as an internship opportunity. Other examples might include a biology student interning at a botanical garden, a nursing student interning with an assisted living facility. Again, things that are clearly curricular are really good examples of. So a bad example is, say you're a culinary arts student, because we have a culinary arts program here on campus. You get a job working for a local fast food place. That is not something that a DSO would approve for CPT because there's no direct clear academic benefit for working at a fast food place. Now, if this was a fine dining restaurant and you were going to be, doing an internship working under a specific chef for a specific reason, that is something we could actually approve. But again, working at Subway or McDonald's, not something that applies, even though you are a culinary arts. And really, when you go through this entire process, you're going to be proving to the DSO that the job is curricular. So once you find a job, you need to be able to prove it to me that the job you'll be doing for the summer or during the semester matches with your degree program. So I'm the person you would need to convince while you're going through this process. So all CPT must include an academic component. And really what this means is there has to be a class piece that goes along with it. The minimum is 1 credit hour, which is the smallest unit that CMU gives out for graded components. So some majors, like our Bachelors of Business Administration, have a specific required internship class that's a 3-credit class that you have to complete before you can graduate. So what a lot of students in other programs will do, so basically there's, at CMU, we have a class that's just a generic independent study that any student really working with a professor can do at any time. And this is, for us, it's University Studies 499 or Univ 499. This is what students would use a lot of the time to pursue CPT if there isn't an already existing class for an internship within their specific degree program. So this is what the process of CPT approval looks like at CMU. The first thing you have to do is find an internship and get an offer for it. Then you have to take whatever that offer letter is and work with your academic advisor and with the DSO, aka me, so that we can approve you. So as I mentioned before, this offer has to be for a specific term. So if you're working for the summer, it has to be from May 25th through August 20th. It has to have a specified beginning and end date. Then you will work with your academic advisor here at CMU to add some kind of class that, again, ties into the academic component of CPT, whether that's your independent study or an actual internship class, because we won't approve you until we see that you're registered for that class. There's also a form that your academic advisor will fill out that requests a review of your CPT application. And then once you have all of those pieces lined up, you come and sit down with either my director or myself, and we go over all the pieces of this. And at the end, if we approve, we will grant you CPT. We will print out a new I-20 with that CPT approval. And if you already have a social security number, you're good to start working on the start date for that CPT. So that overall, I mean, CPT is a pretty straightforward process. We have a lot of students who will do this throughout the course of their program because it's a really good opportunity to get job experience while you're still in the middle of your program. And it also allows students to, again, work full-time in something more interesting than, say, working for a custodial service on campus or working for food service over the summer full-time. All right, so now we are going to change gears a little bit and talk about optional practical training. So optional practical training is another F1 benefit that relates to working off campus. It does have several similarities with CPT that we'll talk about later, but overall, optional practical training is generally more of an actual job as opposed to an internship. So some of the requirements that stay the same, that still has to relate directly to your major area of study. One difference with this is that the DSO recommends OPT in CBIS on your immigration record, but we do not approve this. That's part of the application processes that we recommend it, but we're not the ones who have final say on whether or not you get approved. So another difference is that you don't actually have to have a job lined up to apply for OPT. So you will come in and work with the DSOs to get the approval process rolling, but you don't actually have to have a job, and an offer in hand. So the major difference here is that instead of me approving this, it's the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, who will actually be doing your final approval. And they're also the ones who would issue your employment authorization document, which is an EAD card. So again, a student on OPT can work for any employer as long as they can show that the training relates directly to their field of study. So to make things extra complicated, OPT can actually occur before or after a student's program end date on their I-20. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like and the rules for each of those specific categories. But yeah, and you can't do pre-completion and then post-completion and have them overlap. So the other interesting thing about OPT is that this is a benefit that you get once per academic level. So you can actually do multiple series of OPTs as you do multiple degrees in the US. So an example of this, so say you do an associate's degree, that's a 2-year degree. You get a year of OPT for that. Then you decide to do the next 2 years and get a bachelor's degree. You can actually do another year of OPT after that bachelor's program as well. So then once you finish that, say you want to do a master's program, you can do more OPT after that. And then this continues on all the way up to the doctoral level. So actually, if you started with an associate's level and end with a doctorate, you can spend a lot of time in the US and work legally for a long period of time, all while on that same F1 immigration status. So optional practical training, again, if you want a really good way to remember this is the chance to work full-time as a professional in your field and get real-world work experience. And generally you get this after you graduate. So now let's talk about pre-completion versus post-completion OPT. So pre-completion OPT means that you start working before the end date on your I-20. So realistically, you would choose this if you didn't want to have the academic component of CPT, but you wanted the work experience. And again, this is a job as opposed to an internship. So it's actually doing work for the benefit of the company as opposed to doing an internship to get experience. The thing with pre-completion OPT is that normal F1 work rules still apply. So if classes are in session, you're still limited to 20 hours per week. So sometimes it might be harder to find an employer who's looking for a part-time employee in your field, because a lot of times they're really looking for full-time employees who are going to be around for the next year. So post-completion OPT is honestly what we see a lot more of, because that is the extra year of getting to stay in the US that students receive after they get approval. And there aren't the same work restrictions that are placed on you when you do post-completion OPT, because you've finished your academic program, so the classes in session piece doesn't apply anymore. And again, this still needs to be curricular, and there's also an unemployment cap that we'll talk about in a second. So the length of your OPT eligibility is, generally speaking, 12 months for across the board. And again, as I talked about, you can do this once per education level. So all students who apply for OPT are initially approved for 12 months of work authorization. Within that 12 months, you get 90 days or 3 months of unemployment. So the second you're approved for OPT, if you haven't found a job yet, a clock starts, and that begins eating into the 90 days of unemployment that you're legally allowed to have. So the thing to keep in mind is that 90 days also counts against that 12 months. So if you're unemployed, you're still eating into your full year of OPT while you're looking for a job. If you hit that 90-day cap before you find a job, your OPT then gets canceled and you have to depart the country because, again, you used up all of your allowable unemployment. And this is there's an automated system that tracks that. So unless you have an active job in CVIS portal, it's counting that days against your unemployment cap. So now where things get extra interesting, so students from eligible STEM majors, so STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, they can apply for what's called the STEM extension, which is an extra 24 months of work allowance that you are approved for after you've done your initial year of OPT. So now, again, if we go back to the math of doing this once per academic level, so associate's programs aren't considered STEM fields, but so say you get a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, and then you want to work for a year for some company that does mechanical engineering, then you tack on the STEM extension and work in that same job for another 2 years, and then you decide to get a master's degree. And then you do the same 3 years of OPT, and then you get a PhD. Again, that's, basically a decade that you've spent in the US, all legally, all while still on an F1 visa. And then we did talk about this a little bit before with CPT, but if you do 12 months cumulatively of full-time CPT, this replaces the opportunity for doing OPT after you've completed the program. So unlike CPT, students are required to show that their work is curricular to USCIS instead of me. So there's actually a portal system that you are granted access to once you're approved for OPT, and that's where you need to put in the details and your employer identification number so that USCIS can audit whether or not the work you're doing on OPT is actually curricular. Another interesting detail of OPT, you are allowed to have multiple jobs, but all of them need to relate back to your major of study. So yeah, that's another interesting twist. So the application process also looks a little bit different from CPT because, again, you're not applying and talking to me to get approval, you're applying to USCIS, but your first step is still to talk to the DSO at your school. One of the first things we advise is choosing a start date. So your start date is the earliest day that you could begin working if you were to find a job for your OPT. So the start date for post-completion OPT has to be anywhere between the day you graduate and the end of your 60-day grace period. So sometimes we recommend students pick a start date that's about a month after graduation, because that's about halfway between the start and end of your grace period, but it still gives you time to travel, to meet with friends before, again, you're focusing on working for the next year. Because the second your start date comes and goes, that's when the clock starts on your 12 months of OPT allowance. So again, you'll choose a start date and your DSO will recommend you for OPT in CVIS. And at the same time, you should be working on gathering all the required documents. I'm not going to go into all the required documents, but again, it's things like, a check to pay the application fee, the required application itself, passport photos, photocopies of your visa, that kind of thing. You need to gather all those because those all need to be submitted at the same time with your application. So you can start applying for OPT no more than 90 days before your program end date. So 3 months before you graduate is when that application will be accepted. And actually, you are allowed to apply for OPT within your grace period as well. So as long as you apply before 60 days have elapsed since graduation, that's also allowable. After you've sent in the application, you have to await adjudication. And at that point, USCIS will either approve you, deny you, which we've honestly never seen, or they might request additional evidence. That's gotten pretty rare. Usually, they just approve you if your application was acceptable, and they approve you based on, again, the start date that you requested. So once you're approved, you'll actually get 2 different letters from USCIS. One of them is the letter stating that you were approved and a receipt of that approval. You'll also then in the mail get your employment authorization card. And that's also when they'll grant you access to the CVIS portal so that you can update your employer information for yourself. So yeah, and then just again to review, you don't need a job lined up to apply for OPT. And actually, you can. Some students do start looking for a job before they've finished the application, but they have to be very clear with their employer that they cannot start working until the start date that they are approved for. And then, as I mentioned, again, if you hit 90 days of unemployment, that cancels your OPT. Same thing if you transfer to your CVIS record to another school while you're on OPT, that will cancel your OPT as well. Yep, and then you're required to report any changes in employment to the CVIS portal within 10 days of that substantive change. So this puts a lot more responsibility on the student themselves rather than the DSO to make sure that you're maintaining regulatory compliance. So now, again, here's just a quick overview of the differences between CPT and OPT. I approve you for CPT versus USCIS approving you for OPT. I maintain your record while you're on CPT. The student is the one who maintains that record while they're on OPT. You can't do CPT after you've graduated, but you can do OPT both before and after you graduate. And you're allowed to work up to 40 hours per week on CPT, but only within certain timeframes. And if you're doing OPT, you're gunning for 40 hours per week kind of the entire time. And then you can do CPT really as many times as you want throughout your program. If you find a bunch of different internships, congratulations, you should pursue all those opportunities, but you only get one shot at doing OPT per degree level. So here at CMU specifically, we have two offices that will help you kind of navigate this process and also find it out. So the first one, again, my office, the International Student Programs Office. We help advise all of our students on all immigration processes and applications, and we also provide direct support to the entire international student community. And also we help you with all of these application processes and make sure that you've completed all the necessary steps and review all the other documents. One other office that is available to you is the Career Services Office. So a lot of international students, for some reason, assume that the Career Services Office is only there to help domestic students, but it's actually there to help everyone find internship opportunities, summer jobs, or full-time work after graduation. So this is a really, really good resource if you're looking for an internship for the summer, an internship for the spring semester, or for a job for OPT. They're really helpful, and they also provide services like mock interviews, resume reviews, and a variety of other services to help you prepare for your job hunt. So now that we've talked about these different employment opportunities, I did want to take a minute to talk about CMU specifically and why we're a great fit for international students. So CMU itself is a mid-sized public university. We have about 11,000 students. So depending on where you're tuning in from, 11,000 students might sound like a lot, but in the US, we have schools ranging from 800 students all the way up to 40,000. So that puts us pretty solidly right in the middle. We're located in Grand Junction, which is a safe, smaller city of about 60,000 people located in Western Colorado. We offer 114 different majors split between 13 different academic departments. So chances are, no matter what you're looking for, we have a degree program that would suit your academic goals. One way to think about that is we're sort of in the liberal arts tradition. And really what that means is we have a little bit of everything. If you're looking for engineering, we have some engineering courses. If you're looking to study English, fantastic. If you're looking to study history, political science, fine arts, we have a lot of those. And we also have a lot of vocational programs too. If you happen to be looking for welding or machining or culinary arts, we offer degree programs in those as well. We are also literally just minutes away from some of the best outdoor recreation on the planet, whether you like to ski, whether you like to mountain bike, hiking, river rafting, snowshoeing, it's all right here, right in your backyard. And we actually have an office on campus, the outdoor program, whose sole job it is to put on affordable trips for the student population. And they average sometimes as many as 100 trips per semester. And a lot of those trips will be free or they will be very affordably priced for students. So if you ever wanted to try cross-country skiing and you wanted to an opportunity to try that out up on the Grand Mesa without having to spend hundreds of dollars to invest in a set of cross-country skis, there's an outdoor program trip that would give you that opportunity. Campus itself is pretty state-of-the-art. Over the last 10 years or so, we've invested over $100 million in all of our classroom spaces. So we have smart classrooms across the board. We have really nice computer labs. We have the best lab technology available for all of our science labs. Yeah, everything is exactly what you would expect at the largest, most prestigious research university in the country. So really what CMU offers students is the experience of being in a larger city or a larger university, but you still get that personal touch and the smaller class sizes that you'd associate with a much smaller university. We don't actually have any graduate teaching assistants, so every single class is taught by a full professor who usually has a terminal degree in their field. So really, we're a fantastic opportunity to get personal attention from an expert. And in case you were wondering where we are in the US, here on this map, again, we are located in Western Colorado, about 40 minutes from the border with Utah. And we're just about midway between Salt Lake City in Utah and Denver, the capital of Colorado. So, if you're looking for an experience in a larger city for the weekend, it's not too far to go to get to either of those places. But if you were looking for the, quieter, less traffic, slower pace of life, Grand Junction is a great option for that too. Also, we don't have big city traffic, which again, depending on where you're coming from, might be what you're used to as well. So I wanted to take a moment to thank you for your attention throughout this entire presentation. I know I've thrown a lot at you, but we'll talk about and answer some of your specific questions here in a minute. But I just wanted to leave you with one last shot of the Grand Valley. So if this looks really good to you, CMU might be a place to look as you are looking at places to continue your education. If you wanted to call this place home, for the next 4 years. So now I think we will go to the chat and answer some questions.
Yes, so thank you so much, Alec, for your presentation. And while you were speaking, actually, we already received some questions. So, and I also invite everyone who's connected to write a question into the Q&A. So asking about F1 visa. So they're asking, how can I get my F1 visa and not lose my visa tourism?
So the unfortunate answer on that is you can't. You can only have one U.S. immigration status at a time. So if you are approved for an F1 visa, that cancels your B1, B2 tourist visa. Though one thing I would say is the fact that you got approved for that B1, B2 visa does make it easier to get an F1 visa through the interview process, because they will see in their system that you've been approved for a U.S. visa previously. So that helps you, but you can't have both at the same time.
Perfect. So before you were saying about STEM programs, so they're asking us, Alberto is asking us if you offer a master program in computer science and electrical engineering also as a bachelor level. So if you have both.
Okay, so electrical and computer engineering we do have at the bachelor level. It's actually offered in conjunction with the University of Colorado Boulder. So that program gets a little complicated because you actually end up graduating with a CU Boulder degree, but they are a very well-established engineering school. And you also actually stay in Grand Junction the entire time, which saves you about $20,000 or $30,000 over the course of that degree program, because the cost of living is simply lower on the West Slope. And the fact that you take all of your prereq classes at CMU specifically, and our tuition is lower. We don't have a whole lot of graduate programs. So computer science isn't one of the graduate programs we offer, but we do have it at the bachelor's level. We're primarily a baccalaureate institution, which means probably 98% of degrees we confer are at the associate's or the bachelor's level.
Perfect. Another question they ask us, what are the questions they ask in an F1 visa interview?
So really the F1 visa interview, they're trying to establish a few things specifically. One is that you don't have immigrant intent. The purpose of an F1 visa is not to stay in the US, and it's not a pathway to permanent residency. It's only to complete your degree program, get real world experience and then go home to use that. So they're trying to prove that you don't have immigrant intent. They're also trying to prove that you have bona fide student intent, which means that you actually intend to enter your degree program, complete your degree program, and you're not just trying to get a visa to the US. The last thing is, again, that you can afford your education and that you have significant ties to your home country, which again, go to support your non-immigrant intent. Sometimes that's a little bit harder for, an 18-year-old fresh out of high school because you don't own a house, you don't own a car, you don't own a business. So a lot of times you're really leaning on the fact that you have family back in your home country to help prove your non-immigrant intent.
And is somehow Colorado help to prepare for the interview? Like, for example, helping preparing or answering some sort of question?
Absolutely. That's one of the services we offer to all of our international applicants is we're happy to put together a Zoom call or a WhatsApp call to help you prepare for that visa interview. I think I have 2 or 3 of those scheduled this week for people who are getting ready for their interviews for the fall.
Perfect. Another question is about, do I have to stay in the US for the entire period? So let's say I get the visa, do I have to stay? Or for example, I guess, can I go home for holidays or other periods?
Yep. As a general rule, travel on an F1 visa is allowed. That's one of the other purposes, or that's another thing that you work with the DSO on to get what's called a travel signature. Basically, those are signatures that affirm that you are enrolled full-time and that you're maintaining your F1 status. But then as long as your visa is valid and you have that travel signature, you can go home for breaks and then re-enter the US. So travel is definitely allowed. There are certain rules that you have to follow with that, but it's not like we make you stay here for all 4 years. If you wanted to go home for the summer, you're more than welcome.
Perfect. Wendy's asking us, can I get the F1 visa as a resident?
As a resident of your home country or resident of the US, I guess.
Okay, maybe Wendy can explain a little bit more about what she meant about this. In the meantime, can we ask students about the process? So is there a way to get in contact with maybe some students that went through the process of this F1 visa?
Absolutely. So the first step would be to get in contact with my office, but we have a bunch of students who are always happy to help us reach out to students, especially, so say you're from Colombia and you want to speak to a Colombian student. We have a handful of students from that country who can speak to their specific experience of applying for the CMU and applying for the F1 visa and everything along the way. So if we have a student from your home country, 9 times out of 10, they're more than happy to speak with you and answer your questions from the student perspective, because I'm good at answering questions from kind of the overarching administrative perspective. But yeah, if you want to talk to a student, that's something we can arrange. You just have to talk to me first.
Perfect. Did something change with COVID? Is visa taking longer to process?
So the issue there isn't so much that visas are taking longer to process, it's whether or not the US consulate is open. So depending on which country you're located in, sometimes the consulate is closed, sometimes they're only taking emergency applications. So that's really the big variable. I mean, so literally when you go in for your visa interview, the visa interview itself is only like 5 minutes long, and then they tell you on the spot whether you're approved or denied. So the processing time is literally the length of the interview. So it's not so much that it's taking longer to apply or to approve them, it's just that it might not be possible to get an interview depending on which country you're located in. And there are some things you can do sometimes, and we help you with that process if you can apply or ask for an emergency expedited interview, but that varies by country.
Thank you. And Juan is asking, do you have students in the F1 visa process? You did mention about your office, but maybe we can just mention one more time what you guys are doing to support.
Absolutely. So for undergraduate students, I'm there to help you from the entire process from the day you apply to the day you graduate. So that includes the admissions process, that includes enrolling in classes, that includes advising you on immigration and academic matters while you're here. Also, we put on programs specifically for international students and also to help international students engage with the larger Grand Junction community. And then we're also there to celebrate with you when you walk across the stage and graduate. So, and then help you with OPT after graduation as well.
Thank you. Until when there is a term for this subscription? So I guess when do they need to subscribe for this F1 visa? Is there a period of time? Is there any deadline?
So that ties into the admissions process. So CMU specifically doesn't have a set deadline for you need to apply by this date. This is another one of those things where this is determined a lot by the country that you're a resident of. But basically, as long as you have time to interview and get the visa and travel to the US before classes begin, that works for our purposes. You aren't allowed to receive the visa more than 120 days before your program start date. So for instance, August 23rd is when fall 2021 begins. And I believe actually yesterday was the start of that 4-month window in which you can receive the F1 visa. So the earlier you get admitted, the more time you have to prepare for the visa. But then once you're within that 4-month window, you can interview and receive the visa.
Thank you. So they asking us, entering in the US with my visa as a tourist, how can I, so basically they asking if the process is to enter in the US with the visa as a tourist and then entering in the program and then apply for the F1 visa. So what's
so that gets complicated because you're not allowed to start a program of study on a B1 visa. There is a process to, it's called a change of status, where you go from a B visa to an F visa, but you have to stay in the US the entire time, and you're not allowed to start studying until that B visa is officially changed to an F1. And right now, change of status applications are running about a year. So you might have to spend a year in the US and you're not allowed to work, you're not allowed to study, prove the change of status. So honestly, it's usually easier to interview for the F1 visa outside of the country and then just enter on that.
Perfect. Thank you also for the advice. So someone is saying, I'm sorry if the question is incorrect, but are there cases when the students eventually stay permanently in the US after the F1 visa expires?
So the short answer is yes, with a lot of caveats. So some students will be able to change from an F1 to like an H1B, which is a work visa, but that is not something you work with us on. We're only allowed to advise you on the F1 visa and its processes. You would be working directly with an immigration attorney, and you'd have to find a company willing to sponsor an H1B visa to begin with. So it's possible, but yeah, that's not the intended purpose. Also, again, the other way that not a lot, but some F1 students end up staying in the US is come to school here for 4 years, they meet the love of their life, and they marry an American citizen. That is a pathway to permanent residency, but the F1 visa itself is not a pathway to permanent residency. So it happens, yeah, but yeah.
So yes, there are some doubts, like some things in between, but yes, it happens. Another question about, so we did say about getting the job or internship. They say, can Colorado help me to find a job or maybe internship? Like, someone can check my resume and cover letter? Do you offer this sort of career service?
Absolutely. So that's one of the main functions of our career services office, which again serves the entire campus community, regardless if you're a U.S. citizen, a U.S. permanent resident, an F1 student, a J1 student. They're there to serve and help everyone affiliated with CMU improve their resume, practice for interviews, find a job, apply for a job. Yep. So absolutely, that's something we can help you with.
Someone's asking, what do I need to apply to the F1 visa?
So I can only answer that specifically for what CMU requires. The first thing we require is you submit our online application, and then you'll submit all of the required documents. The short version of that list is that we need your academic transcripts, whether that's from high school, or if you've started university level study in your home country, great, we accept foreign transcripts as well. If you're looking for transfer credit from a university, there's an extra step to that process, but that's an entirely different conversation. So academic transcripts, we need a copy of your passport so that whenever I issue a document, it matches your passport exactly. We need to see proof of English proficiency if you're from a non-English official country. Usually that means a TOEFL or an IELTS score, though we also accept Duolingo, and students like that test because it's cheaper for one, and also it's 100% online, so you could literally do that test from your living room and you don't have to travel to a testing center. And then lastly, there's 2 more documents for proof of funding, because you are required to show that you can afford your education to be approved for an F1 visa. One of those is just a bank statement showing sufficient funding to meet the estimated cost of attendance. And then there's one other form that's basically just gathering information about who will be sponsoring you, and that's a CMU specific form. And then once we receive all of those documents and review them and they meet our admissions requirements, then I would go ahead and issue an I-20 and write an admission letter as well and send those to you so that you can interview for the F1 visa.
Usually, how long does it take to get an answer after you submit an application to CMU?
Yep. So generally speaking, we try to keep the turnaround time to less than a week. We want you to spend more time focusing on preparing for the visa interview and not wondering. So generally speaking, from the day you send us the last document, so if you send us all the documents up front, turnaround is very quick. But from the day we get the last document that completes your application, we will usually process that within the same week. I usually have a time block set aside on Fridays to process all the completed applications from that week. And then you'll get an email with instructions on how to receive your physical documents after your application has been processed and your admission has been approved.
So you mentioned before that you can actually apply for this visa more than one time. For example, if you find more than one internship throughout the year, what in case if you are rejected the first time? Can you try one more time?
So CPT is only after you've been approved for the F1 visa. But so yeah, if you are denied in your visa interview, you are allowed to then reapply. The thing to keep in mind is you're never going to get approved within 6 months of a denial. So if you get denied, your choice is then to defer to the next semester. So say you were applying for fall and you get denied because they say they don't think you have strong enough ties to your home country. You can't just immediately turn around and get another visa interview. You need to defer to the next semester and then get a new admission letter, a new I-20, and then with the same CVIS ID number, and then go in an interview for the next available semester. We more or less operate on a 3 strikes system. So if you get denied the first time, cool, we'll defer you to the next semester. And if you get denied the second time, you get one more shot because they can see in their system every time that you've been denied, and every denial does make it a little bit harder to get approved. So that's sort of the reality of the situation is you get 3 tries at it, and that's a CMU policy. That's not a USCIS. If you find another school that wants to admit you if you use up your 3 strikes with us, more power to you, have at it, and hopefully you get approved for them. But it does get harder with every denial.
Thank you. So before you mentioned that you can actually apply for this F1 visa and come to CMU in case, for example, you are finishing your graduation but you want to move to CMU to finish your bachelor degree. Is that possible? So someone starting in the countries and then move?
Yep, absolutely. So that would be a case where you are technically a transfer student because you have university level credit. You're a transfer student even though you're not transferring from a different school in the US. So really the only difference between that and a student right out of high school is that you'll be sending me university transcripts instead of high school transcripts. But yeah, then the only other question that you would have is, are you trying to transfer those university credits from, say, a university in Italy or a university in Colombia to the CMU, in which case you have to have your foreign transcripts evaluated by a third party that's NACES accredited to determine the equivalency between the classes you took and the classes we took here. If you want to just start your program from the beginning, then that evaluation process isn't necessary.
Thank you. So you did mention before among the documents, you also need, for example, to show that you have sufficient funding to stay in the country. We received some questions about scholarships. So in this case, can a student, for example, apply for a CMU scholarships or other sort of scholarship before applying for the F1 visa? How does it work?
Yep. So again, this is one question where this would look different if you applied to a different school. So all international applicants for CMU are automatically considered for the International Merit Scholarship, which is worth $9,000 per academic year for your entire program. Even if you change your majors halfway through and have to take an extra semester or an extra year to graduate, you still get that scholarship. And really what that does is it brings the cost of attendance down to right around what an in-state Colorado resident would pay. That's the only scholarship that's available at the time of admission, but there are then, once you've been here, there are departmental scholarships, there are foundation scholarships, but you have to be physically on campus to apply for them and compete for them. Third-party scholarships, you're more than welcome to use those and apply for those, but you're kind of on your own in figuring those out because we can only help you with CMU specific scholarships.
So someone is actually saying, so for example, based on merit means high enough GPA or those sorts of things. So that's how it's based.
Yep, it's based on your academic preparation and your high school grades or your university grades, depending on your exact situation.
So we did mention that you mainly offer bachelor courses, but Caio is asking, so I am in electrical engineering in Brazil and I am almost completed my bachelor, that is 80%. So he's asking, should I try to get my visa before I finish the course, or should I wait and asking the visa for a master's degree? So I guess he's probably asking if you should finish the course, for example, at CMU for the visa or wait.
Depends on what you're trying to do and where you're trying to apply to. If you really want to come to CMU, then you would have to do that before you finish your program so that you could finish your bachelor's program here. That gets a little bit more complicated with how far along in your program you are and the fact that our electrical engineering program is a joint program between two different schools. So they might not decide to accept you for that program because you're in the equivalent of your senior year and you have so many credits completed abroad. So that gets a little complicated, but again, then the fact that we don't offer a master's program in electrical and computer engineering means that if you were trying for that, you would be looking at a different school.
Thank you. So we are here mainly to talk about the F1 visa, but we actually received a couple of questions about the admission requirements. So they're asking us about the English level. So you mentioned the Duolingo test and some other tests. Will you be the right person to contact about admission requirements, like for example?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can answer all of those questions. If you're wondering specifically about the English requirements, so for IELTS, we require a 6.0. TOEFL, we require a 70. Duolingo, 95 is the minimum with kind of review of your subject scores, and it's a 105 or higher is kind of automatically okay.
Perfect. You actually mentioned how CMU is international and how many international students you have. So they're actually asking if you have lots of Brazilian students in the program at CMU. So for example, if there is a small Brazilian community that maybe these students can contact.
Yeah, we have, I think 5 or 6 Brazilian students right now. A couple of them on the soccer team, a couple of them on the tennis team, a couple of them just studying here in general. And I know I'm working with several Brazilian applicants as we speak. So yeah, generally speaking, we always have a contingent of Brazilian students. And actually, there's a video that you're going to get in kind of the thank you email from this that is from one of our Brazilian students.
Good. Maria is asking, which program do you offer at the bachelor level?
Sure. So right off the top of my head, we do offer 2 bachelors in mathematics. We offer, I think, 4 or 5 different engineering programs. In terms of sciences, we have chemistry, biochemistry, biology. Let's see what else. We also offer environmental science and other geosciences programs. A good place to review that would honestly be our program finder page, just because, again, there's some programs I don't remember off the top of my head because we've never had a student apply for them. But in terms of popular programs, pretty much everything I've just listed. Also, if you're interested in studying medicine, the closest we get to a pre-med back in the US is probably our biochemistry program.
Thank you. So we talked a lot about this program, but Pedro is asking us if, for example, someone can apply to CMU and maybe just get some sort of internship program or like a summer program for someone who's already graduating.
So we do partner with exchange consortium programs like ICEP. So that's really the only way to do a short-term program right now, depending on if you're already completed, say, your bachelor's program. Unless you want to start another bachelor's program, we tend to specialize more in, again, degree-seeking students, but we do have exchange students as well. So that would be a good one to talk to me on kind of a case-by-case basis. We can do things along those lines. It's just something that we would have to work out with you specifically because every individual situation is different.
Perfect. We actually have some questions about how to keep in contact with your office to apply for the program, but also to get more information. Is there maybe an email address that we could share, maybe in the thank you email, so people can follow up?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to give out my email in kind of the thank you email with this, and I'm happy to keep any of this conversation going and keep contact with you.
Perfect. So yes, we will be sharing the video that Alec was mentioning earlier, but also we will be sharing his email address and the team. So in case you have any further questions, and maybe more personal questions also about your situation, definitely can be dealt with. So we actually coming towards the end of our presentation, and we answer all of your questions, which were very, very interesting. And I wanted to ask Alec if there was anything else that you wanted to add, that maybe hasn't been said, some sort of advice to someone who's looking to put an application through.
The only thing I'd add to this is, again, usually the students who have the motivation to study abroad and to take that risk to study in another country are, the most motivated, the most driven, the students who really want to succeed. So, if you're willing to kind of take that leap and try to study in the US, you have a really good opportunity in front of you. I mean, the US university system is kind of the world standard for a reason. So I would really love to get the opportunity to talk with some of you again about kind of your goals, your aspirations, and how we might fit into those plans for the future.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Alec, for your time and for your presentation. And I'd like to thank everyone that's been connected and for all of your very interesting questions. So we really look forward to seeing you soon, and we will be sharing this thank you email, which contains all the information about the F1 visa, but also the video and a contact email that you can get in contact in case you have any further questions. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Alec.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.